And I call the member for Macarthur.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. So 15 minutes, and like Voldemort, he couldn't even mention the member for Dawson's name. So the race that was not a race is now a race. Now, for me, this is very, very personal. I've been contacted on multiple occasions in the last few weeks from my medical colleagues, from my relatives who work on the front line in intensive care, in hospitals that are really under the pump, under pressure because of the outbreak that's occurring in Sydney. 356 cases today, 60 in ICU, many on ventilators, 6 deaths associated with the outbreak at Liverpool Hospital because of a healthcare worker who was infected. To have the Leader of the Opposition move this motion today, I can only say thank God and thank you. It is about time those in government called to account those on their side who are undermining our response to the pandemic, to those whose statements are costing lives, and to those who are doing everything they can to undermine our national response to which is to something that's the biggest health crisis in over a century. And I don't just mean the member for Dawson, the member for Hughes, of course, the captain's pick at the last election, Senator Rennick, Senator Canavan and others who are doing their best to cause increasing fear, increasing distrust, and are undermining our response to the critical time in this pandemic. This Delta variant, make no mistake, is a different game. This is something that we still do not know how it's going to end. And we have to do everything we can to maximise our response, to maximise our immunisation rates, to maximise our social distancing, to make sure that people who are, of course, fearful, and with fear comes distrust, of course they're fearful as to what's happening. Many in my electorate have lost their livelihoods. Many in my electorate cannot see how they're going to pay the next mortgage repayment, who can't see how they can protect their own kids, who can't see their kids even going back to school. And yet we have people on the government benches who are actively undermining our response. Now, I don't like to see healthcare workers as heroes. And I'm sure the member for Higgins can understand this. What they do is they get up every day and they go to work, some of them putting their lives at risk because that's the job they do, because they care about people and they want to make sure that our response is the best that it possibly can be. And that's just the job they sign up for. The nurses, the doctors, the cleaners, the pathology technicians, they're the people that save lives. I don't save lives sitting here as a member of Parliament, but I recognise that it is a huge privilege. And with that privilege comes a huge responsibility. And when I see people on any side of politics doing active harm to our response to this crisis, this health crisis, it just makes me angry. They should not be ignored. They should be called out on every occasion, because what they are doing is disgraceful. And I think any sensible person would understand that the time has to come when they should be called out. Now, we've seen in countries like India and Brazil and Indonesia, thousands, hundreds of thousands, indeed even millions of deaths. And to call this pandemic or this virus like the flu, surely that is beyond any reason, beyond any acceptability. And yet we have a government, a Prime Minister and members of the government who ignore it, don't call it out, allow it to be propagated in social media, on the national media as acceptable is just wrong. The member for Dawson needs to be called out. The member for Hughes needs to be called out. The senators need to be called out because we need to recognise the harm that they are doing. The Prime Minister was right. We have fantastic medical professionals in infectious diseases, epidemiology, vaccines, and we are very grateful to have them and very grateful for the way that they have tried their very best to keep us all safe. But to see members of the government and members of other political parties as well doing what they can to destroy our response and not criticise and not call them out is just wrong. I should also mention a previous member of this House, Clive Palmer. Shameful what he's doing. He is actually letterboxing and messaging those in some of the most vulnerable electorates in Sydney, trying to undermine our response to this pandemic. Now, every one of us should take that responsibility very, very seriously. And I know most members of the government do, but I think it is no longer acceptable to ignore the absolutely disgraceful comments from the member for Dawson, things like masks don't work, masks make no significant difference to the spread of COVID-19, lockdowns don't work, lockdowns don't destroy the virus but they destroy people's livelihoods. Imagine if you're locked down in Sydney and you're a tradesman or a manual worker and you're hearing this message from a member of Parliament. Imagine what that does to your confidence in the advice, the medical advice you're being given. Now just think about that. All of us in this place have a responsibility to keep people safe. What we do does actually matter. We're not there in intensive care sucking the secretions out of people who have a tube down their throat, breathing with the use of a respirator. We're not there with people who aren't able to visit their grieving mother or father who is terminally ill with COVID-19. But we can make a difference. And we can make a difference by calling out people who actively seek to undermine our response. I'm so grateful for the Leader of the Opposition moving this motion. It's one that everyone in this House should support. And I think it is time that we did all work together and condemn these people. Condemn members of our Parliament that are undermining our response to this great health crisis. Condemn those in the media who are doing the same thing, who are undermining our response. We all have to do that. If we all do it together, that's what will make a difference. I worry about all my colleagues and my relatives who are working at the front line of healthcare because they are putting their lives at risk. And if we can reduce the number of patients in intensive care, if we can reduce that risk for our healthcare workers, that is a very, very good thing. They are doing the job that they signed up to do, to keep us safe. And I mentioned also our police forces who are charged with compliance and making sure people do the right thing. They are doing in Sydney at the moment a fantastic job as well. And I really fully respect the very softly approach that the New South Wales Police have taken to this, and I congratulate them on the job that they are doing. But as leaders in our community, all of us should be doing the right thing, and we should be calling out those, like the member for Dawson and others, who are actively seeking for their own benefit to undermine our response.